Okay, we're going to get started now, and this event is being recorded, so hopefully people that miss it will be able to view and watch and learn and listen after the fact. So we'll let you know when it gets posted online. Welcome to our webinar, A Global Conversation on Surrogacy and Why an International Solution is Needed to Protect Human Rights. I'm Jennifer Lahl. I'm the president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture, which is based in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. I like to refer to California as the reproductive tourist capital of the world. Clearly, there's other states trying to compete with California, though. I've produced several documentary films, Exploitation in particular, that features young women who made the decision to sell their eggs. And that film tells the story of harm to their own health and their own fertility. I also produced two films on surrogacy, Breeders, a subclass of women, as well as Big Fertility. These last two films feature American women who served as surrogates for couples in the United States and abroad, and their devastating stories. Stories of risk, harm, ill health, lost fertility, financial ruin, and exploitation. Stories that you will not hear reported in the mainstream press or on the fertility agency websites. I also co-edited with Dr. Renata Klein and Melinda Tankard-Rice a book titled Broken Bonds, Surrogate Mothers Speak Out. Renata is also the author of another important book, Surrogacy, a Human Rights Violation. Later this month, I'm going to be reporting on another surrogate case out in California. It involves a surrogate mother in Southern California who was a surrogate for a couple in China. Stories like hers and many more are why we need a global conversation to address these most grievous human rights violations to women and children. Our format today will be that each of our speakers will have 20 minutes for their remarks. Then you will have the opportunity through the chat box to leave questions that our moderators will be sending to me, so we can have your questions directed to the speakers after they each speak. I now would like to briefly introduce our two distinguished speakers so that we can maximize their time with you. Our first speaker will be Kajsa Ekis Ekman, who is a Swedish author, an op-ed writer and culture critic at Dagens, ETC, and Aftonbladet. She lectures regularly across the globe on trafficking, surrogacy, capitalism, and economic crisis. Her powerful and important book, Being and Being Bought, Prostitution, Surrogacy, and the Split Self, has been translated into 5 languages. Her talk, Surrogacy is Baby Trade, at the Sydney Festival of Dangerous Ideas, sparked a debate on the ethical implications of the booming surrogacy market. Following Kajsa, we will hear from Gary Powell. Gary is the European Special Consultant to the Center for Bioethics and Culture. He's a conservative political activist in the United Kingdom and longstanding advocate for gay and lesbian equality, having been a gay rights campaigner himself since the early 1980s. Gary opposes the modern Western LGBT+ movement for its adoption of extreme gender ideology, its failure to represent mainstream LGBT communities, and for its lack of respect for the rights of women, children, people of religious faith, and dissenting LGBT people. One of Gary's philosophy professors was Baroness Mary Warnock. Mary Warnock was an expert in reproductive ethics, and her work led the inquiry into the Surrogacy Arrangement Acts of 1985, as well as the United Kingdom Human Fertilization and Embryology Act of 1990. All 3 of us, Kajsa, Gary, and myself, are original signers of the Stop Surrogacy Now statement, which is an international campaign calling for the ban on all forms of surrogacy. All the books I've mentioned have been authored by original signatories of Stop Surrogacy Now and are published by Spinifex Press and are available online. So at this point, I'd like to turn the floor over to Kajsa, and then Kajsa, when you're finished, Gary, you can just feel free to give your remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you for the invitation. I hope you can hear me well. So I think this panel testifies to the diversity of the people opposing surrogacy. I mean, personally, I am a feminist and a Marxist. Gary's a conservative, but I think you can come at this from many angles. The point is that we're a lot of different voices who oppose what we think is the modern day reproductive prostitution and baby trade. So to start with the definition of surrogacy, maybe some of the listeners are new to this topic and don't really know what surrogacy means. So surrogacy basically means a woman is made pregnant in order to give the child away, usually for money. So it differs from adoption in the sense that adoption generally is supposed to take place when a child is orphaned, whereas surrogacy has as very point that the child should be removed from his or her mother. So the point of surrogacy is to create motherless children in order for the buyers, because 95% of surrogacy cases or more so are paid. We often hear the story about the sister who's volunteering for her childless sister and so on, but generally this is an industry. This is a growing industry that's basically about outsourcing reproduction from rich to poor. So the same way as the production of material goods is being outsourced to mainly China and Asian countries, so is happening with the production of people. This means that if you don't want to have your own children, you don't feel like getting pregnant, you can't get pregnant, you are not a woman, you are too old, you are an actress, you are an athlete, you're infertile, somebody else can have them for you. Now, surrogacy has been presented as a story of modernization, of diversity. Finally, everyone can have their own children without having to carry them. And it's also being marketed by a lot of famous people that started selling surrogacy as an easy and great way to have babies. You have the football player Cristiano Ronaldo, who in his case, it seemed like he either didn't have a girlfriend or didn't want to have a girlfriend because he wanted full control over his offspring. So he's hired several women to carry his babies. You have stories like Kim Kardashian, who, and this is very interesting because as she was afraid that another pregnancy would be too difficult, but she wanted another baby, she decided to have somebody else carry the baby. So, and her words about this pregnancy, I quote, were, "This was by far the most difficult pregnancy I've had." And the media was reporting on this, like, you know, without questioning that in fact it wasn't her being pregnant, it was somebody else being pregnant for her. We never found out who that person was, who that woman was, what was her name, how did she feel about it. But the whole story presented as, you know, this is Kim Kardashian and Kanye West's baby. It's very interesting in this case because the female buyer almost takes on a role in the pregnancy that's the traditional man's role. Like, she's walking around there, she can drink, she can smoke, she can party while somebody else is carrying the baby, which typically would be what the man would do, right? So this enables some very privileged women of the West to almost like become men in relation to reproduction. Then you have famous gay people like Ricky Martin, for example, that are emulating the heterosexual model, you know, that don't want to have babies with, for example, a single woman or a lesbian couple because they think that they're the couple, so the baby should be theirs and they don't want to share it with anyone else. So at the same time as this is being presented as something new and exciting and as modern technology, we also hear a lot about how this was already in the Bible. We hear the story about Abraham, whose wife was unable to conceive, and then he took the servant, the female servant, Hagar, who had to have the child for him. So this is a way of saying this is new and this is modern and exciting, but calm down, folks. This goes way back to Abraham in the Bible, so don't get scared now. Increasingly, we also hear the notion that one has the right to have a child. If people like me criticize surrogacy, we are told that no, everybody has a right to have a child. You can't deny these people a child. Look at these infertile people and their plight, and how can you deny them their right? Now, we have to remember there is no such right. There is no convention of the rights of parents stating that all Western people with an income above so-and-so have the right to outsource pregnancy and have somebody else carry the baby for them, right? There is, however, a convention of the rights of the child, which says that a child has the right to his or her mother and father, and as long as it's possible, has the right to also grow up with them. It also says in a number of conventions that no child should be bought or sold. Now, philosophers are going to great lengths to tell us that this is not baby trade. And I analyze a number of these arguments in my book. Some of them are saying that it can't be baby trade because the baby doesn't exist when the contract's being signed. So you can't trade something that doesn't exist. Yet other philosophers say that what's actually being sold is not babies, but a bundle of parental rights, as if it's actually the child buying the parents. And yet other philosophers say that because you can't, per definition, legally own a person, it can't be baby trade because they don't own the child, right? So the arguments are either there is no baby, so the baby's not bought and sold, or the baby buys the parents, or human trafficking can't ever exist because you can't own another person. You know, with the same logic, you can say that restaurants cannot exist because when you're ordering the food doesn't exist yet, or it's the food that buys the person, or, you know, when you've paid the food doesn't exist anymore. So, you know, you can't buy food, basically. You can't ever buy dinner at a restaurant. You know, but all these arguments, of course, exist to normalize the fact and kind of cover the fact that what we're dealing with is organized baby trade. Children are being bought and sold because that's what the buyer is paying for. If the baby doesn't exist when the contract is signed, and because of that, it can't be baby trade because there is no baby, then, you know, would they still pay if no baby was delivered? Well, obviously not. As soon as the woman gives birth, the buyers usually are in the same room. The baby's handed over to them. She seldom has the right to breastfeed, to hold the child, because they want to minimize the bond between the mother and the newborn. So the child is whisked over to the buyers, and the final sum is delivered to the woman, or mainly to the agencies, because who is really earning money from this is not the surrogates, but the agencies. So of course, what's being bought here are babies. So surrogacy on one hand, I would say, is baby trade. On the other hand, it's also reproductive prostitution. It has so many similarities to prostitution. It's kind of prostitution turned up and down. Because in prostitution, what's being sold is obviously sex, and most buyers of sex in prostitution do not wish to have an offspring born out of prostitution, right? So the point of prostitution is to have sex but no babies. Like reproduction should not exist in that world. Whereas in surrogacy, the point is to have babies but no sex. Generally, sex doesn't happen in surrogacy. So the myth that's being sold to surrogate mothers or prospective surrogate mothers is that this is not sinful. This is something that doesn't involve sex, so you're not being unfaithful to your husband, and so on. But apart from that, it's basically the same thing. It's a woman's body being used for the purpose of other people. So she's not seen as an end, she's seen as a means to an end for other people. Often the language of the surrogate industry really betrays what's going on here, because they call her a vessel, they call her a container, a babysitter, and so on. There's one word that's prohibited in the surrogacy industry, and that's mother. They would never refer to her as a mother. So what surrogacy does is basically it feeds on the inequalities that already exist in the world. The buyers are, of course, richer than the surrogate, obviously. Very often they come from another country, from a richer country. They are generally have better education. Of course, all the surrogates per definition are women. The buyers are often men or upper class women. And there's also kind of racial element to this, because surrogacy really kicked off when it became possible to have the surrogate carry a baby from a different egg than her own. So this meant now that you could lower the prices by exporting the industry to places like India, but without having the baby actually be from India. So you generally would buy the egg from, say, Europe or the US, and then implant it into an Indian woman. and have her carry it for like 1/5 of the price. And generally the rights of surrogates are less the poorer she is or the poorer the country is. That's why the agencies, when they promoted places like India, they said, well, in this place, you don't have to worry. She's not going to start, a custody fight. She's not going to file for her rights. You can just go in there and you're going to be sure that you can take your baby out. Often the proponents of surrogacy will say, well, this is actually reproductive autonomy and choice because she is deciding to do this. This woman wants to do this. She wants to help other people. She wants to earn money. They often interview a surrogate that says exactly what they want. But if you look at the actual contract in the surrogacy industry that you, Jennifer, have analyzed in an article that was excellent, if you look at the terms of the contracts, they specifically stipulate that the surrogate hands over the rights to her own body. For example, she may not even paint her nails sometimes. She cannot travel. Generally, when you go from the US to Ukraine and then from Ukraine to India, she has more and more restrictions on what she can do until the most extreme places where she can't even leave the hospital. She's literally a prisoner for the whole pregnancy. Now, even things like she can't have an abortion if she wants to. If she doesn't want an abortion and the buyers want her to abort, she will have to comply. Obviously, legally, this wouldn't hold, but they can still sue her for breach of contract, which is going to leave her in a terrible legal situation. And the worst chilling fact of it is, if she has an accident, it's the buyers, not her family, who can decide to keep her on life-sustaining equipment until the baby can be taken out by cesarean. So it's very clear in the contracts that she's handing over her reproductive autonomy. She's handing over the rights to her own body. Since they own the child, they own her body. So, and we also have to remember that pregnancies in surrogacy are not normal pregnancies. They're not what like a woman in the US or Europe who has children because she wants to have children would experience. But because they use generally IVF, so there is hormone injections, there's lots of pain. They generally implant 3 to 5 embryos at a time and then abort the ones they don't want, to maximize the chance of success, and so on. So the industry doesn't want us to know the real conditions in the surrogacy industry. Now, when I started working on the subject back in 2006 and 7, my idea was that we would create, awareness about this in Europe, and we would gradually start banning surrogacy. What's really happened actually is that it's the countries that are the destinations for reproductive tourism, such as Thailand, India, and so on, that have started banning surrogacy before us because they are sick of the reproductive tourism. They don't want this anymore. They've had all these scandals where people are leaving babies behind because they got Down syndrome or something. And generally it's creating kind of tourism that they don't want. And also it's exploiting of, I've been to Mexico in the state of Tabasco, which had a loophole in the legislation where there was a whole street where like almost all the women had been surrogates because the industry was going in there and convincing everyone. Some of them were being infected by HIV through being surrogates and so on. So all these governments now in what you would before called the third world are saying, no, we don't want to be bought. We don't want to sell our children. But what about us? Like, it's our countries that are lagging behind. We're not taking responsibility for this. And before I end, I just want to say that there is a move now, which we have to be aware of, to create something like a Hague Convention on Surrogacy that they've done with adoption to kind of, make standards, which to some people might sound like a good thing. Okay, there's a protocol, you can't just do whatever, and the anarchy state. But on the other hand, what's happening is that it's legalizing, it's giving the green light to the whole industry. So I've been to a meeting in The Hague where you have organizations like the Red Cross or Save the Children and others who are actually working to formalize and legalize the baby trade, despite that there is no official statement from these organizations. So the representatives are sitting there giving suggestions for a kind of convention on surrogacy without having a green light from their organizations. There's been no discussion, there's been no vote. So I think that we have to be very aware here of what's going on. And before this happens, we have to move on to ban this whole industry, because it is a shame that human trafficking, baby trade, and reproductive prostitution is kicking off now in our time. Thank you.
Thank you, Kajsa. And I just want to remind our attendees that they can be putting questions in the chat box that we can address after. So now I will turn the floor over to Gary Powell.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Kajsa, for that excellent presentation. And as you say, although we may be on different parts of the political spectrum, we speak as one on this issue. I'm going to be talking quite a lot about the LGBTQIA+ movement, or the LGBT movement. In my view, it's crucial to look at the engines driving the legalization of commercial and so-called altruistic surrogacy. And the LGBT movement is one very significant engine. We need to realize the lack of validity of this movement itself and of its arguments. This webinar focuses on the need for a global solution to the surrogacy industry. I'm going to provide an example from the UK of why this is the case, and of how a president of the UK Supreme Court, Lady Hale, facilitated commercial surrogacy tourism abroad to California at the UK taxpayers' expense, even though commercial surrogacy is illegal in the UK. And that actually accords with what the example that Kajsa has just given of preparations, measures being introduced that go way beyond what any lawmakers have sanctioned. The need for gay male couples to be able to obtain children via surrogacy was a key justification in Lady Hale's judgment. And so this also links in with the theme of the modern LGBT movement being a driving force for the liberalization of commercial surrogacy laws globally. The basic human rights of women, of lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, and of children are under a degree of threat that I have never witnessed before in my lifetime. Reactionary, misogynistic, homophobic, and totalitarian political movements have emerged and are taking hold that constitute a very serious threat to the basic freedoms we have until recently enjoyed in the West. Big business continues to facilitate this authoritarian movement, and we see big financial interests intertwined with these changes. As Kajsa mentioned, we have the outsourcing of pregnancy, like any other commodity. Throughout this webinar, I'd propose follow the money as a central thread. Indeed, one of Jennifer Lahl's films, her latest one, is called Big Fertility. It's all about the money. All of Jennifer's excellent films are currently on Amazon Prime, by the way, and I strongly recommend them. I think some links are in the margin. The advance of these totalitarian forces has been insidious and gradual. Masquerading as progressive, they've cleverly managed to hijack what were previously positive movements for social change and ideologically capture major Western institutions, including political parties. I'm a gay man and I've been a gay rights campaigner for about 40 years. I care passionately about the basic civil rights of LGBT, lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. However, the LGBT rights movement has been hijacked and turned into a very well-funded movement that is more like a fundamentalist cult than a political rights movement. The LGBT movement now centers campaigns such as extreme gender ideology and surrogacy that cause serious harm to women and children in particular. It acts like a modern inquisition or witch hunt, trying to silence people by cancelling them and destroying their lives. The Middle Ages has managed to slip back into modern Western culture. Most LGBT people globally are in hiding, at least with regard to our sexual orientation, given the number of countries where homosexuality is still illegal, with capital punishment or flogging the penalty in some countries. Even in countries where homosexuality is legal, there can still be a great deal of stigma. The gay rights movement still has a lot of work to do globally. Stonewall is the main UK LGBT charity. It was a gay rights charity, and quite a good one, until 2015, at which point legal equality was achieved for LGBT people in the UK. So Stonewall decided to become a gender identity obsessed institution to keep the cash flow going and its turnover is now over £8 million per year, with its CEO earning a six-figure sum. Follow the money. There is still so much work to be done to bring about basic LGBT equality worldwide, such as the decriminalization of homosexuality and the ending of execution of gay people in places such as Iran. But Stonewall has decided to centre gender extremism instead, where the rights of women and of lesbian, gay, autistic, and gender non-conforming children are casually thrown under the bus. Follow the money. In recent years, I could see that the LGBT media and political outfits were starting to flail around after new causes to which they could attach themselves and their money-making machines. Surrogacy was a very useful candidate. It was one of the means by which gay men could become parents, or at least wealthy gay men. That bit is usually glossed over by the pro-surrogacy LGBT campaigners. Commercial surrogacy is the only pretended gay right, so-called gay right, that can benefit only the wealthy members of the gay community. Commercial surrogacy in the USA often involves six-figure sums. Even so-called altruistic surrogacy in the UK could involve almost £40,000 in costs. If access to commercial surrogacy were a legitimate gay right, then it would be a gay right from which only a wealthy gay male elite can benefit. There is no other pretended gay right that falls into such a category. The arguments against all forms of surrogacy for all people are compelling. However, the arguments against commercial surrogacy in particular are the most compelling, which is why commercial surrogacy is illegal in the UK, or at least it's supposed to be. It's forbidden by the Surrogacy Arrangements Act 1985. Even so, I tried to find a single case of a prosecution under this act and was unable to find one. It seems to me to be a paper tiger. So-called altruistic surrogacy is not illegal in the UK. This is a form of surrogacy entered into via a private arrangement that's supposed to involve no remuneration beyond reasonable expenses. In fact, quite a lot of money can change hands, and it's just a lower paid form of commercial surrogacy. The arguments against commercial surrogacy overlap strongly with the arguments against living organ purchase. It's so clear that the legalization of organ sales would lead to poor and destitute people selling their kidneys to the wealthy out of desperation, encouraging the worst kind of exploitation. People will die as a result of not being able to buy a kidney from someone who wants to sell one. Despite this, it remains illegal, and it is globally understood why human organ sales should remain illegal. The only country in the whole world where it's legal is Iran, the place where they hang gay people from cranes, and where the state will subsidize the sex change operations of gay and lesbian people so they become heterosexual transgender people who need not fear the noose anymore. If I expressed my view that human live kidney sales should remain illegal, do you think I would be attacked online by a hateful mob and misrepresented by fanatics in online publications trying to make me out to be some kind of hate-filled extremist? I think you'll agree that this is very likely. However, when I say that commercial surrogacy should be illegal for the same reasons that human organ sales should remain illegal, I am called a homophobe and accused of hating gay people. It's all about them and what they want. Sometimes I wonder whether this echo chamber politics turns its activists into irascible, hate-filled and narcissistic teenagers, frozen in their immaturity. No one dies as a result of not having a baby, yet people die as a result of not being able to buy a human organ from living donors. And a baby is, of course, much more than just a human organ. There are currently moves to further liberalise surrogacy in the UK and to make it easier for people to go abroad, rent women's wombs, and buy babies that they can then take back to their home countries. There is a new concept of fertility equality for gay men that's driving this. Because the phrase fertility equality has the word equality in it, it looks as though it describes something good. If we're playing Orwellian word games, what about legalizing the sale of human organs in the service of organ equality? Despite how the LGBT media and other unhinged individuals like to portray me, I strongly support gay parenting via adoption or permanent care arrangements of the kind that exist in some Australian states, or via fostering. But I oppose surrogacy for the harm it causes to women and children. The hit pieces against me, by the way, normally don't bother to mention that I'm actually a veteran gay rights activist, or that I'm gay at all. It doesn't fit their hate and propaganda agenda to do so. They treat their readers like idiots and deliberately manipulate them into believing falsehoods, stoking up hatred like some kind of Stalinist propagandist. It's particularly damaging to the struggle for gay rights in oppressive homophobic countries abroad for surrogacy to be promoted under a gay rights banner, as it increasingly is today by the LGBT lobby. We are now in a political age that's particularly unstable and volatile. I have never before experienced this level of compelled speech and oppression of free speech in the UK and other Western states. The erosion of freedom and civil rights is happening gradually, but I sense that unless we fight back against it with all we have, it could at some point become irreversible across the West, and we could end up with a totalitarian state with imposed ideology. The other risk is of a backlash against this increasing totalitarianism from the extreme right, leading to a different but equally ugly form of totalitarianism. There could come a point where it becomes illegal to say you oppose surrogacy, or that you oppose children receiving puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, or amputations of body parts. Or, if the aggressive LGBT lobby contributes to a cultural backlash that reaches tipping point, there could be an extreme right backlash where homosexuality is recriminalized and the authoritarian and harmful campaigns led by the LGBT movement are used as a justification for doing so. If we are to avoid the real risk of Western society slipping into extremism, we need to take what is happening today very seriously. The hate-fueled excesses of the LGBT movement, funded by big business with interests in the fertility industry or the sex change industry, could cause a backlash that spreads across the West and across the globe. Or it could continue to bring about a totalitarian society where women are objectified, instrumentalized, and commercialized, and treated as breeders for wealthy people, and it's illegal for anyone to express any objection to it. Many participants in today's webinar will have read The Handmaid's Tale or watched the TV series. One of the shocking parallels I see between the fiction and reality is how women, birth mothers, are these days erased completely as mothers when a celebrity gay couple is reported in the LGBT media as having had a baby. These days, you probably won't find any reference at all to how the baby got there. The report often proclaims, like some horrendous rainbow-clad Aunt Agatha, that such and such a celebrity gay couple are having a baby or have had a baby. There is no mention of how the baby got there, of the involvement of a mother. Clearly, the baby has come about as a result of wealthy men renting the womb of a woman who has endangered her life and health and engaged in a high-risk pregnancy in order to provide these wealthy men with their product. It's clear we have got to pretend there is no third party involved. The celebrity couple are treated like those wives in The Handmaid's Tale, pretending to give birth while the ideologically captured readership shouts, "Breathe, breathe," in encouragement, and where the pregnancy heavy lifting and the risk and the duress happen out of sight. Everyone is coerced into pretending that the people who cannot fall pregnant are the only ones involved in producing the baby. Despite the misrepresentations of the LGBT movement, there is significant opposition to surrogacy among many gay and lesbian people. As I mentioned earlier, To understand what has happened to the LGBT movement in terms of its ideological capture and the socially harmful turn it has taken, you just need to follow the money. I've been involved in gay politics for a long time, and I've seen what has happened to the gay rights movement. Gay politics used to generally be characterized by a great sense of comradeship. People were allowed to have different opinions. You weren't called anti-gay or homophobic unless you really were anti-gay. These days, that freedom to dissent no longer exists. Now, this callous and conformist culture that today characterizes the political LGBT movement is what I've very often witnessed from the gay male commercial scene, which now includes the sex meetup scene. It is a brutal, narcissistic world where people are accepted or rejected according to looks, youth, conformity to group norms, such as dress and fashion, and conformity to group values, such as LGBT politics. It depersonalizes the other and turns him into a sex object to be instrumentalized. The values of the gay male commercial scene have now crossed into the LGBT political movement, where thoughtfulness, empathy, compassion, and comradeship with the real LGBT community are in very short supply. This is the character of the vehicle that is being fueled by big business and whose ideology is capturing Western institutions and cancelling voices of dissent. Earlier, I referred to the terrible situation so many LGBT people worldwide suffer in repressive countries. LGBT people in highly repressive, homophobic countries such as Russia, almost all the states in the Middle East and Africa, and many other countries are already experiencing the backlash that is resulting from the overreach of the Western LGBT campaigns. Decisions are being made in Western countries that demonstrate no interest at all in how they are likely to impact on LGBT people in repressive states abroad. The governments of repressive homophobic states are using the excesses of the LGBT campaigns in the West, including the demands for surrogacy and gender extremism, as an excuse for opposing even moderate demands from gay and lesbian people for civil liberties, such as the decriminalization of homosexuality. We are already seeing reports on social media on how this is happening from the people affected. Those repressive governments can now point to the obvious harm the LGBT movement is doing in the West and use this to excuse opposition to the legalization of homosexuality. This makes life so much harder for LGBT people in those countries. These days, the LGBT movement is aided and abetted by judges who seem to be going way beyond the law, politicized judges. An example of a recent case is that made by Lady Hale on the 1st of April this year, which flew under the media radar because of the pandemic crisis. At the time, Lady Hale was the president of the UK Supreme Court. The current president is Lord Reed. Lord Reed disagreed with Lady Hale's judgment, saying that it was contrary to public policy. Nevertheless, Lady Hale's judgment supporting commercial surrogacy tourism, funded by the UK taxpayer, prevails, and there is no higher court of appeal. Lady Hale's Supreme Court judgment was extraordinary in that it upholds a claim of over £500,000 against the National Health Service to finance 4 commercial surrogacies in California, encouraging a woman who had suffered permanent disability and trauma to subject herself to the stress of raising 4 children, whilst putting other women at risk of serious harm or death in order to carry those 4 children. And this was because the woman in question said that she'd wanted to have 4 children. Particularly extraordinary is the fact that this award, to be paid for by the UK taxpayer, was made for her to pursue something abroad that is illegal in the UK for the very reason that our lawmakers deemed commercial surrogacy to be unethical. The award made by the Supreme Court was contrary to public policy in the view of the 2 dissenting judges. This award was in addition to a previous award of over £500,000 against the NHS to the woman concerned for the physical harm she had been caused. It is a separate and additional ward earmarked exclusively for commercial surrogacy in California. It is the LGBT movement that has been clamoring for commercial surrogacy rights, and Lady Howell's judgment referred to the aspirations of gay men to have children via surrogacy. How can it be acceptable for the UK courts to facilitate a practice abroad and even at the taxpayer's expense that is illegal in the UK for the very reason that it's deemed to be unethical, like live organ sales, and harmful to women? To me, this could lend itself to an interpretation of racist or xenophobic colonization. It's as though it's okay for the harm to be caused so long as it's only foreign women who get harmed, and if the British state doesn't have to deal with the fallout. This is why a global solution, an international solution, is needed to the global surrogacy industry, with its exploitation of vulnerable women and its trafficking of vulnerable children, all of whom are treated as commodities by wealthy people. All of this with the sanction of today's misogynistic, homophobic, and mercenary LGBT political activists. Let us please be aware that time may be running out. In the West, our basic freedom of speech is under attack, and our media and other institutions have already undergone staggering levels of ideological colonization by LGBT extremists and their authoritarian, fake progressive fellow travelers. This is a time for coming out again. This time, though, to find the courage to come out as opposing human rights abuses, such as surrogacy and the transitioning of children that the LGBT movement aggressively promotes. If we do not act now, there may come a day when speaking out becomes a criminal act, and the window of opportunity may remain closed for a long time. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Gary, and thank you, Kajsa, for your excellent remarks. And Gary, go ahead and leave your microphone on, because I'm going to field some questions now that have been coming into the chat box. I'm going to actually take the first question. Somebody was asking, how does our conversation today relate to the trafficking and trading of human eggs, specifically targeting smart, pretty, attractive women? I always like to make the point, whenever you see the announcement of a gay couple who's just had a baby through surrogacy, it's always gestational surrogacy, which means that the woman is pregnant with an embryo created by another woman's egg. So in the whole discussion around same-sex male couples having babies through surrogacy, there always is an egg donor who's never ever even mentioned. You know, they'll maybe refer to the surrogate, but you know, the distinction when they recruit and target women for eggs, they do want smart, pretty, talented eggs, but when they're looking for the womb to rent, they're not interested in smart, pretty, beautiful. They're interested in low income, a woman who's willing to carry a pregnancy and take on that burden and risk for 9 months. So there's a clear distinction there. I'm actually going to give the first question to Kajsa. Somebody asked, one, where were these meetings that took place that you referred to? I guess if I could just add on to that question, how can we be aware of these? I mean, these meetings often happen and we find out after the fact that they've happened versus in advance when we can maybe have a voice or an impact.
Yeah, well, that meeting was in The Hague, and it was very strange that they even invited me because I had no say whatsoever. I mean, basically everybody there except me and one other person were for surrogacy, and we're just ignoring our remarks. We were going to draft a type of convention, but you know, everything that we as opponents to surrogacy said was like not put in there. So I think somebody had invited us just for us to observe what was going on and maybe tell everyone, although we were specifically told that, you know, there was this can't remember what it's called, but when you're not allowed to quote people, when you're in a meeting and you're not allowed to quote who said what. So I can't say what representative said what, but I can say that all these organizations that don't have a mandate were there and basically drafting this. So this definitely needs to be told. On the other question about soliciting eggs from college students, I think pretty and smart is a kind of euphemism for white and rich. I mean, that's what they really mean. Basically what they're trying to do, it's a kind of form of eugenics. You know, they're trying to create a kind of elite baby. And of course, they want the genetics, I mean, the DNA to come from somebody who's white, who's rich, who's tall, and so on. Because of course, they think that if the egg donor has university education, that means the child is going to be smart, you know, but often that just means that the mother is rich or has rich parents. Whereas, of course, if she was the one to carry the baby, you know, they'd have to pay a fortune. So, of course, they're choosing this poor woman in India who might not even be able to read and write, who's living in illiteracy. And maybe it's even her husband, as is the case in so many cases, that he's bringing her there so that she can make income for the family. So she doesn't even get the income herself, who has to carry the baby. And I think this is on a deeper level. This is a form of like fragmentation of motherhood, of womanhood, because they're saying you're no longer whole. First of all, you're separated from your child. Your egg is separated from your body. Another person is pregnant with that egg. So basically, you can no longer say who is the mother. You know, is it the adoptive mother? Is it the egg donor? Is it the surrogate? And does it have no mother? So basically, this is diminishing. I mean, I don't know, like if to call it the spiritual power of womanhood. But on some level, it is a threat to womanhood because, you know, you see that what we're creating, the buyer are always talking about feeling whole, you know, feeling whole as a family. But this wholeness is depending on the fragmentation on the other side. And I think one of the greatest books that I can really recommend is the book Birth Mother. That is written by, let me get it, I have it in the bookshelf, I'll get it later and write it here. That's written by America's first public surrogate mother that wrote about her experience. And she said that surrogacy basically threw her into a depression. And she said that she now believed a couple of years afterwards that surrogacy is the transfer not of a child, but of sorrow, because one woman is in pain because she can't have children. And then another woman has to take that pain for having to part with her child. So it's not a win-win situation.
Yeah. Gary, we have a couple of questions for you. One was asking specifically about if you've written about the Lady Hale judgment. And we know you have, so maybe Callie or Kaylee could put the links to what Gary's already written on Lady Hale. But specifically, Gary, there's a question, if you could comment on the surrogacy community as cited by the UK Law Commission. And the person is asking, is this surrogacy community sort of like the Muslim community or a Christian community where elderly men are allowed to speak for everyone without consultation? And Gary and I both addressed and met with the UK Law Commission. So can you address who this community is that the UK Law Commission is citing?
Yes, I mean, this is a good question. When organizations refer to communities, I think we're very wise to be quite skeptical. For instance, there's a lot of reference to the LGBT community, and what on earth that is, I'm not absolutely sure. You know, it's really a movement that's driven by kind of self-appointed people, often people on quite high salaries with vested interests, you know, politically captured people, zealots. The surrogacy community, well, as far as the British Law Commission was concerned, it seemed to exclude the people who opposed surrogacy. They needed to have some, although they did carry out a consultation, we were free to present our counter arguments. They didn't really make much of an effort to meet with people who opposed surrogacy, and we had to encourage them to do that. And in fact, they did meet with a feminist group, and they met with Object UK, and they also met with Jennifer and myself eventually. But I'm skeptical about the idea of surrogacy communities. I would imagine that it's made up of a lot of people who have got a vested interest in driving this forward. Lawyers, agencies that will you know, be able to have whose employees will be able to have quite lucrative jobs under new legislation if the Law Commission's proposals go ahead. What we haven't got yet is a really strong community of people opposing surrogacy. And one of the main reasons for that, in my view, is that people don't really know how bad it is. It's very difficult to get our evidence. Jennifer's excellent films, for instance, into the public domain. And whenever the media report on surrogacy, it's always skewed towards happy families narrative. Isn't this wonderful? These people weren't able to have a baby, and a very self-sacrificing woman, if she's mentioned, has provided this baby for them. And we don't hear about the terrible risks involved with so-called egg donation, when they're actually paid for, and to the birth mother's injection of strong hormones. So what we really want is a strong anti-surrogacy community. That's what we need in the UK, in the USA, in Sweden, in the West, a strong anti-surrogacy community. And we'll build it up one brick at a time. And our webinar today is a small contribution to that.
Did you find your book, Kajsa?
Yeah, I found it. And I saw also there are more questions on the other side. So maybe I can, how much time do we have left? Can I respond to them as well?
Yeah, we have about 15 minutes. So
okay, perfect. Yeah, so this is the book that I was talking about is called Birth Mother by Elizabeth Kane. She was America's first public surrogate mother. Then there are other books that I can also recommend, such as Mary Beth Whitehead. I don't know if you remember the Baby M case, A Mother's Story. This is fantastic. The Mother Machine. Yeah, so there is, and of course Renata's book is amazing. So I think there's a lot of literature for people that actually want to understand what surrogacy is. I had two questions. One was, isn't it better for women in India to become surrogates than to work in a factory? And I would say that argument is poverty as an excuse for exploitation. You could always argue that. You can always say, well, there's poor people, so because of that, you know, let's see if somebody wants to sell a kidney. Let's see if somebody wants to sell a leg. Let's see if somebody wants to sell a baby. Let's see if somebody wants to sell a 14-year-old into prostitution. Isn't that better than so and so and so and so? And, you know, that argument can only exist because there is poverty. Now, exploitation doesn't eliminate poverty. There's never been a situation where poverty has ceased to exist because there was exploitation. Usually what happens is the other way around. Because there is exploitation, poverty gets worse. And I don't think that's a valid argument to allow human trafficking. Because what's always forgotten in this is also the interest of the child. Has the child chosen to part with his or her mother? Has the child chosen never to see his mother? We know from the adoptive community of children who are now grown-ups who have been adopted that it can be very painful to know that you've been bought, that you are a victim of human trafficking, that, you know, it can create anger, sorrow, longing for your real parents. And often the records are destroyed, even in the surrogacy industry. So it will be very difficult for these people who will later on be grown-ups to search for their mothers. Sometimes in interviews, the mothers in poor countries don't even know in which country their children are living. So it's very difficult for them to keep in touch. Mm-hmm. Then there was another question. Let me see here. It says, because there is increasing evidence that IVF donor surrogacy births are high risk for both mother and baby, some feminists have argued that traditional surrogate births are safer. Do you agree? Well, you can always say, you know, what is worse? But generally, I think we don't need surrogacy at all. There's no need to have any form of surrogacy to eliminate the other form. What I can say, though, is that I can observe that after IVF was introduced in the surrogacy industry, it became increasingly more difficult for surrogate mothers to try to demand custody if they change their mind, because in courts, the judge would say, well, you're not the mother, you were just delivering a reproductive service. You share no genetic material with this child, so you have no right over this child. Very interesting, because when it comes to egg donation, you know, that same argument doesn't hold. If a woman receives an egg from another woman, she's still considered the mother, but in surrogacy, apparently, she's just a vessel. So, and then there was one more question. Let me see here. It says, I also identify as a Marxist feminist, although I support a global ban on commercial and surrogate gestation. Don't you think that if we lived in a world without disparity in income and resources, this would not be an issue? I mean, in a world where nobody would ever be in the position to pay somebody else thousands of US. Well, of course, I mean, if we eliminated capitalism now, I mean, lots of problems would disappear. I often think when it comes to exploitation, such as, you know, now with the Epstein case coming up with prostitution, trafficking, and so on, that having billionaires and having famous people is a real danger. You know, I don't know why that should exist, because the more money you have, the easier it is for you to exploit someone and get away with it. So obviously disparity, economic disparity, is fueling this whole thing, because the more money somebody gets, the easier it is for them to build a trafficking ring or to buy babies. I mean, just look at the Japanese billionaire who bought 18 babies from different surrogacy clinics all over Thailand, and, you know, actually got custody of them all. I mean, how is he even going to take care of 18 children? And when asked, he was claiming that it was because he wanted to become a politician. He was going to build an electoral base. They were going to become his voters. I mean, you think 18 people is enough, you know, to vote for you? Japan is a big country. So there was fears, you know, is this guy a pedophile? What's he going to do with the children? And there's also that, because surrogacy is the perfect industry for pedophiles. Obviously, you know, this is the only way that a single man can have a child and get custody of it without any mother being around. I mean, in what other industry does that work?
Yeah.
You know, so this is very dangerous. But I think we can't wait until poverty ends. We obviously have to stop surrogacy now before it gets out of hand.
Yeah. Gary, there was a question to you about coalitions, and Kajsa sort of set it up earlier when she made her opening remarks about the diversity of the political spectrum and just the different ways people come together. You have experience, obviously, as a politician in England. What would you comment about the difficulty of building coalitions, navigating coalitions where people come from different starting points, and how we can work together and have a global solution?
Well, actually, what people have to do is dig down and find their common humanity. And actually, people can connect very well on that level. I mean, I know Kajsa and I have very different views about Marxism and capitalism. I used to be a Marxist when I was younger. I got very disappointed. I've ended up as somebody who supports capitalism, but that opposes, thinks that capitalism can be moderated and controlled and prevented from causing certain types of human suffering. Though we could have a debate about that, but where we have an alignment is that we all across the political spectrum in our community oppose surrogacy, and that works really well. The interesting thing is that, you know, from my gay lesbian rights work, the enemy was always religious people who thought that homosexuality was a sin. And I always thought, dreadful people they were, and they didn't understand, they didn't listen, they were causing so many problems. And of course, as a conservative, I'd kind of listen to some people on the political left, and I'd get very frustrated, and I think, oh, how on earth could I ever work with people like that? But through working in the campaign to oppose surrogacy, I work with people who have quite conservative religious views. As people, they're actually absolutely lovely people, really lovely people. I also work closely with lesbian feminists who are, and non-lesbian feminists who are very tolerant of my conservative politics. We find as human beings, we connect with each other very well. Some excellent friendships have developed. And I liken this to what happened in the Second World War, to the alliance against fascism. We had UK conservatives working with Stalinist communists, a whole range of political beliefs, but everybody working together in an alliance against a common enemy that had to be defeated, where that enemy couldn't have been defeated unless we all worked together. And it shows that when the chips are down, when things get to a state of urgency, which is what I think we've reached in the West, we can work together and we can form these alliances, and we can have differences of opinion on capitalism, conservative Marxism, but we can have an alignment on the particular issue that we're arguing against. I mean, I listened to what Kajsa was saying in her excellent presentation and her analysis, and there was nothing that I disagreed with. And I didn't even disagree with what she said about big business and the outsourcing of commodification that happen with any other good. You know, we're very much in alignment. So I think what we need is friendship in this movement, friendship and solidarity, and we will make progress like that.
We had quite a few comments about, questions about data and studies, and data as it relates to risk and surrogacy, data as it relates into separating mothers and babies. I'll just quickly just say the scandal in this, or dirty little secret, is how little data we have and how much the industry doesn't want data. Think of big tobacco in the early days of smoking. Big tobacco fought doing the studies, they fought educating people, they fought putting warning labels on. And so we're kind of at that tipping point now. So I think, again, with solidarity, with growing a global movement, we can put pressure on this industry, and they'll expose what we all know to be true. A couple of questions about mother-baby separation bonding. I like to always remind people, we have a dog, and when our dog was a puppy, by the law in California, it is inhumane for us to separate our newborn puppy from its mother for 8 weeks. So we had to wait 8 weeks by law because it was seen as animal cruelty and inhumane treatment of animals. And in human situation, we do it without even thinking it has any kind of trauma to mother or to baby. And we can play, my friends say, a baby womb wet from the womb, and plop it into the arms of strangers and think that nobody is harmed by that. Kajsa, did you have a couple more questions that were thrown up at your
Yeah, I think there's too many questions now that I won't be able to answer all of them, but there was one question that there is a surrogacy fair this weekend in Paris and the authorities are not doing anything. What can you do? Well, I'm a member of an organization here in Sweden that's called Feminist No to Surrogacy. And what we would do is we would turn up dressed as like the Handmaid's Tale. These are like, costumes that you can make yourself quite easily. You just Google the pictures and you try to construct something similar and you turn up like that. And you just stand there. That's a very efficient image. Like you look at that and you say, wow, and
the French organized a protest and they all stood out front with shopping carts with plastic baby dolls in them. Like they were,
yeah, I've seen
like
that photo as well. Yeah.
Powerful.
Yeah, that's great. So I think it's very important because we've had a company that has established itself here that's called Nordic Surrogacy. And it's really awful. Like they buy generally from Ukraine, and they offered a discount half a year ago on surrogacy. Now there is a 30% discount. So get your baby now. What happened, of course, the epidemic. So now lots of these babies are stuck there at the hospital. And this just shows like one of the so many things that can go wrong with surrogacy. Because, it's not meant to be that way. Like, as Gary was saying, you can come at this from a lot of perspectives, like left, right, feminist, humanist, but at the end of the day, like we're all human beings. We have feelings, right? We understand that, we're not machines. Like you are carrying a baby in your body, like you give birth to it. And it disappears, it's taken away. Like, that's just not normal. Like, how can you not understand that there's suffering involved? Like, I think the weird thing about how the media portrays surrogacy and feelings is that the buyers, the intended parents, as they call them, are endowed with all these feelings. Like, their lives are not complete if they can't have a child. Like, all they want is a child. Like, they already got the cradle, they got the toys, and now they just want the child. Like, their feelings are valid, right? But they've never seen the baby. But the mother who's carrying the baby, who's feeling a kick, who's giving birth to it in pain, like her feelings are not valid. Like because she's poor, because she's from the third world, because often she's not white, she's seen as a robot. And the child is just seen as a product. Like it doesn't count at all.
Yeah.
Can I add, and also because she's a woman, and what I'm seeing at the moment is I have never seen so much misogyny in our culture, and it is absolutely shocking. The level of misogyny that we're seeing in modern politics and in modern cultural development is absolutely appalling. And it's as if women's interests, women's rights don't actually matter. and that they have to be subjugated very much to the demands of wealthy men who are actually driving the industries, the big pharma, big fertility in this matter.
And if I might add, Gary, that we're seeing so much of that misogyny here in the United States from women's organizations, prominent women's groups that identify as feminist groups, who have bought into it's her body, it's her choice, it's her right. So if she wants to become a sex worker or sell her eggs or rent out her womb, it's her choice. And so we're up against that in the United States. So when you look at big feminist organizations like, the National Organization for Women, that has not taken a public stand on this issue, which I find is very sad and deeply disturbing. So I think that goes kind of everywhere. I think we're just about at the end. We could, like you said, we could take questions all day, but in the interest of time and our audience, again, our campaign is to stop all surrogacy. We don't want a regulatory approach. We don't see how you can regulate away these harms that you've heard about today, these risks, the trauma, whether it be psychological, emotional, financial. Regulation will not fix this problem. It's a pure abolitionist position that we take without any apology whatsoever, similar to the Nordic model and what they're trying to do with prostitution. So we're going after the industry and after the buyers. So we hope that you will join us in our efforts to stop surrogacy now. And there's many campaigns all around the world, like Kajsa mentioned in Sweden, there's a campaign, there's a UK organized campaign, Object Now. There's an organization down in Australia organized by Dr. Renata Klein. So we're all in this together, and we thank you for your time. And I appreciate your efforts, Gary and Kajsa. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And we will record this and post the recording hopefully in the next few days. Thank you.